summarize the Hayek material to begin our move to Rawls, I suggested, even though I think Hayek would not like this, this description, I suggested that for a variety of reasons, Hayek could be viewed as probably one of the most persuasive of conservative thinkers in the middle and second half of the 20th century. Most interesting, compelling, conservative authors. And some of this is contrivance, it's pedagogy, you could set up different people next to each other, but I set up Hayek as the person who I wanted to represent to you as the critic of Marx and of indeed all central planning schemes. The critique is practical. Hayek's critique of socialism, of any ideology that suggests that we should sort of try and control the economy from the center, it's not a critique of the ends. I mean, Hayek does not say that the ends of socialism are contrary to human nature. Hayek, or at least that's not his main case. He doesn't say that the ends of socialism are bad or anything. What he says is the means chosen can't achieve those ends or any others effectively, unless the end is social chaos, the breakdown of society, the breakdown of the economy. Now, again, I portrayed socialism because this is the way Marx, now he's one among many kinds of socialists. There are socialists from quite independent traditions, much more utopian, more idealistic than Marx. I offered you Marx's version of socialism because that's been the one that's most influential in the 20th century in terms of real politics. At least people pay lip service to Marx. Marx did not, far from thinking that we should reduce social involvement in industry and productivity, he thought that capitalism had run into a wall. It had created the seeds of its own destruction. It was very important to continue the further productivity of society, unleashing social productivity, but the capitalism was not in a position to do that. Socialism could. And that's where Hayek takes Marx on. He says, Marx, no, that's not possible. A central planning regime is inherently inefficient. You will not be able to accomplish your ends. In fact, you won't be able to do anything. You'll be blind. You'll be blind. Unless there is a price mechanism that's motivated by profits, that's set on the market, unless you've got that, then there's no way to know when you're using resources in anything like an efficient way. You'll overuse them, you'll run out of things, you won't produce the right things. Shelves will be empty over here and overstocked over there. You'll have no idea what's going on. Now that's pretty much what happened. It's not that there's something inherently counterproductive about the socialist ends, it's the socialist means that was criticized here. So in the end, the idea is, well, we do need profit mechanisms, pricing mechanisms established by supply and demand. We need those things because that's the only way to make use of resources efficiently. Now, it's not so much part of Hayek's particular argument, but this, is in line with the general classical liberal or modern conservative or libertarian or free marketeer argument that suggests that the market is the best way to allocate resources for everybody. It's not the case that under the regime of the market, under capitalism, under free enterprise, the argument goes, it's not the case that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The rich get richer, all right, but everybody gets richer. Everybody benefits. Now that's an argument that's meant in some way to appeal to some of the sentimentalities of people who are concerned about the plight of the poor. It makes the claim anyway. It makes the claim that capitalism is good for the poor, better for the poor than socialism anyway, better for the poor than any centrally planned economy. And where Rawls makes his case, at least, now he doesn't direct his attention specifically to Hayek, but I'm going to try and use him as the foil to Hayek, as the representative of modern liberal thought, modern liberal now, not classical liberal, modern American liberal thought, welfare state kinds of thought. In a way, I want to portray Rawls as saying to people like Hayek, well, put up or shut up. You say that these markets are better for everybody, even the poorest. If that's true, if it really is true, then okay. But let's make that the criterion. Let's make that the deciding factor in determining whether we should have a capitalist society or not. If indeed it does, in the end, improve the lot of even those who are worst off, well, that's great. But if it doesn't, then we need to correct this. And that's so and he's going to. The implication, maybe, I don't think Rawls says it explicitly, but the implication is clearly that we can't just accept, the theoretical argument that says that capitalism will make everybody better off, or that the markets will. This is going to be something that's going to have to be empirically shown. And I think also in Rawls you'll see that this may differ from time to time and place to place. It might be that in some circumstances that's exactly what's in order, something like markets, but in other circumstances that's not what's in order. And what Rawls will say, though, is the way we make this decision is by figuring out what's in the interest of those who are least well off, least advantaged in society. That will determine all kinds of things about our society, not just its economic system. So in any way, what Rawls advanced in his book, A Theory of Justice, which you've got excerpted in the text, what he advanced was a theory that could, in principle, accommodate the conservative argument, the Hayekian argument. But he also suggests that it's kind of a put up or shut up sort of thing. If indeed you're right, Hayek, that the poorest people are made better off by the society you envision, then okay, that's the society we should have. And that's the reason. The reason will be because it benefits the poor. Now, first of all, there are two interesting things about Rawls, two different sorts of things that are going on. First, there is a theoretical framework which is extraordinarily interesting, which Rawls doesn't think of as particularly liberal, and I'm inclined to agree with him, although lots of people disagree. They think, no, his liberalism infects even the theoretical framework. But he at least intended that this be something more abstract. This isn't supposed to be liberal. This is supposed to be a framework from within which, and this is what Rawls says, from within which different ideologies, different approaches to social and political philosophy can be contrasted and compared. So first of all, there's this supposedly neutral theoretical framework. It's neutral as regards ideology. Then there is a good part of Rawls's book fills in the framework with a liberal content. He gives his interpretation of how the theoretical framework should be filled in. Now, I'm using Rawls as the representative of liberalism here, but I think this framework is just, is intriguing in its own right. It's philosophically lots of fun. So I'm going to spend, I guess, most of the time today talking about that framework. At least in the early part of today, talking about the framework, and then we'll get to his liberal interpretation of the framework later on. That'll be the second part of what we do. This theoretical framework makes use of the idea of social contract. Remind me, please, what we're talking about when we're talking about social contract in political theory. You've encountered it before. You've encountered it to some extent in Hobbes and in Locke. Social contract. Any thoughts that you have about it? I mean, I'm maybe bewildering if you figure, well, what am I supposed to say about social contract? Just tell me anything you know about social contract theory. Yeah, Paul.
That by living in a society, you're thereby agreeing to act in like certain ways in respect to one another.
The idea that by partaking in civil society, one thereby agrees to renounce certain liberties that one would otherwise have. That's part of the basic idea, all right. Hobbes spoke about the state of nature. Hobbes spoke about then a move from the state of nature to civil society. The key in that move is the establishing of a contract. Now, different theoreticians, and I pointed this out earlier, different theoreticians, in particular Hobbes and Locke, who we study closely, have different understandings of what that social contract's all about. Hobbes said that there was a move that was made that brings people out of the state of nature and into a situation, into civil society. What's that move? What do people do? How do people get from the state of nature to civil society, according to Hobbes? State of nature, life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, short, horrible situation, very difficult to get out of. You don't want to just agree with people, well, we should get out of the state of nature. That's not quite enough just to sort of form a verbal agreement. That would be a contract, right? An effective contract needs a little bit more than just that verbal agreement. So what do? He says, words without the sword are not worth much. Yeah.
Put all the power into one person and let him.
Okay, we agree. Here's Hobbes' interpretation of the social contract. We agree with one another. We agree to give all our power and strength. Of course, we're going to cheat. We're not going to give all of it. But what we agree to is to give all our power, our weapons, our resources, our obedience to one third party. We're not contracting with the third party. We're not contracting with the Leviathan, the governor, the dictator, or whatever you want to call it. We're contracting with one another, and the dictator is not party to this contract. The dictator still exists, or the Leviathan, the king, the monarch, whatever you want to call it, or the small group of people. That's also allowed as a possibility by Hobbes. Those people are still in the state of nature with respect to us, but we've now given them huge amounts of power. There's no right or wrong that they can do us. Because right and wrong now are going to be the rules that guide our interactions. So the social contract is between us, and its purpose is to bring us out of that terrible, terrible state of nature. For Locke, the contract isn't just among ourselves, but with the third party, if you like. I mean, we actually contract with an agent. He understands the government as being our agent to accomplish certain goals. And in particular, the agreement of the contract is that the government, the agent, should remove those few inconveniences that were to be found in the state of nature, and to provide what I called before the night watchman state functions. I mean, that's the job that the government, who is our agent, has agreed to do, just like our attorney. And if the government doesn't do that job, then it's just like any other employee. We fire them, get somebody else to do the job right. Very different understanding of the contract. For Locke, the contract is between us and the government. And incidentally, us among ourselves, we all go in on this agreement together. For Hobbes, it's just us, and then we're just giving our power to this Leviathan, the sort of like a God on earth, just short of power of the real God in heaven. I emphasized that while both Hobbes and Locke talked about this as if, in terms that might make you think that they believe that this actually happened historically, that once upon a time there actually was this state of nature, and people did have all these horrible problems or inconveniences, depending on how you look at it, and that they then historically actually did, at some point in time, they did move out of the state of nature and into civil society. They both sometimes talk like they believe that. They both sometimes talk as if they think that there are places, even then when they wrote, where the state of nature ruled human affairs. America is a good example, perhaps, for both of them. But I hope you remember that I said that's not really the way to look at this, not as an historical thesis, but as a hypothetical. It's not a question, did this really happen? And then it's not a matter like if you find out, well, it didn't never really happen, so therefore the whole theory is overthrown. It's not an historical theory. Whether people ever were in the state of nature doesn't matter. It's a hypothetical. It says, here's what things would be like. That's the would be, is the hypothetical part. Here's what things would be like, each of them claims, if we didn't have a government. They would be either awful or inconvenient. And we would have good reason to try and form government. It's because of the awfulness or the inconvenience of the state of nature. That's why we need government. Whether maybe there never was a state of nature. Maybe people have always understood this. Maybe they've always had governments. But it's a hypothetical. If there were no government, we would need to invent it. Rawls emphasizes the hypothetical character of the social contract so that there can be no doubt about what he's talking about. In fact, if you're going to get annoyed by Rawls at all, it'll be because this thing seems so abstract and unrealistic. That's indeed what a lot of his critics have gotten upset about. And yet I think that there's a great deal that's going on that's a very great interest in Rawls's use of the social contract. He is trying basically to figure out what, just like these other thinkers were, what is it that it's reasonable for people to do in the way of arranging their social institutions. So he's interested in trying to figure out what is, basic question. Now it's a theory of justice, but he's interested in establishing principles of justice in social institutions. One, figure out a method for arriving at such institutions. So there's a methodological question. Two, use the method to establish principles of justice. Now, those two, 1 and 2, correspond to 1 and 2 over there, okay? The theoretical framework that just does set up the method that's to be used for arriving at just institutions. And the liberal content of his theory is his attempt to use that method to establish particular principles of justice. Okay, now what's the method? Well, Rawls asks us to do this. I mean, figure out what you think, how you think society is made up. Now, each of us may come up with different answers to this question, and it's an interesting matter to get into the discussion of what is the basic makeup of society. I mean, Marx would have told you that it was classes, made up of various socioeconomic classes. You've got working class people, you've got the bourgeoisie. Maybe when Rawls was writing, there's still some hangovers of the landed aristocracy, but they'd be economic classes. We might say, well, we've got genders. I mean, that one of the social matters that we have to be concerned about is the relationship of genders. And in the United States especially, but more and more everywhere in the world, we may say, well, what we have to worry about is the different kinds of, there are different people that come from different cultures that are trying to work together in our society. So you might have different ethnic groups, different religious groups, different genders, different economic classes still, different occupational specialties. I don't know what you'll think of as being really the important categories of persons that have to get along in society, that have different characteristic interests, concerns, goals, whatever. Maybe you'd be disgusted with this whole operation. You say, no, there's just one sort of thing. There's what's a human being. That's all there is. It's just human beings. There aren't these categories of persons. But while I think Rawls would have a lot of sympathy with that at some level, I think he'd say also that there are commonalities, different people who, there are large groups of people who find themselves in some similar circumstances vis-a-vis their society. Now think about those groups, and you don't worry too much about pinning down exactly which groups you think are the important ones. I just want you to think about people in terms of groups, classes of that kind. And think of society as being comprised not just of individuals with individual interests, but with groups of people who have common interests that may be similar within the group but slightly different from the interests of others. Think of the difference between corporate heads as a group and employees as a group. Just to go back to some sort of Marx-style differences. Think of the differences between those who are born wealthy and those who are born poor. Maybe the differences between people who are born, not necessarily, maybe it's not even just economic, people who are born into families where there is a great deal of support for the exercise of initiative, for ambition, for education, on the one hand, and the group of people who were born into families who don't give them that kind of support, or into environments that don't give them that kind of support. Any ways that you think about society yourself. Do your own analysis. But Rawls would urge you to recognize that there are these different groupings within society that are especially important in trying to figure out the principles of justice. Now, imagine, this is going to get more and more thin, more and more abstract, less and less practical. So bear with me. Imagine that each of those groups is represented by a representative person. This isn't supposed to be somebody who's elected by the group. This is supposed to be somebody who represents the interests of that group. In other words, someone who has the characteristic interests of the particular group we're thinking about. This should be an ideal person in a couple of different ways. All we care about for our present purposes in trying to figure out the principles of justice, all we care about is that this person represent the group. So, the social contract involves, it's a hypothetical agreement made by ideal representative, quotes, representative persons. And they're going to come together, and they're going to try and figure out what the principles of justice are. The representative persons are. We're supposed to imagine, this isn't, forget about history, forget about time, but we're imagining that we're going to get all the important groups in society, each one represented by someone who ideally has, just exactly the motivations that are characteristic of that group, and the problems and the worries and the concerns. And then it's those represented persons who are going to come together, and they're going to come to agree on, they're going to agree on what principles should guide society. And nothing short of unanimity will do among these representative persons. Nothing short of perfect agreement among them all. Now, how are we going to accomplish that? Well, remember, these are ideal persons. Rawls introduces a very peculiar sounding concept, but it's a it's not all that arcane if you think about ways that we think about these sorts of things. He says that these negotiations and deliberations are going to take place under a veil of ignorance. And remember, this is hypothetical, thought experiment. These people, now as it happens, here's a representative of women, here's a representative of African Americans, here's a representative of corporate interests. Here's a representative of every other group that you might think of as being important in devising principles of social justice. First thing, they're going to, once they walk into this room, by magic, they won't know which group they represent. Weird. They won't know which group they represent. They will forget that. They won't know that they're male. They won't know that they're female. They won't know that they're poor. They won't know that they're rich. They won't know that they're black. They won't know that they're white. They won't know any of these things. Anything that is relevant enough to require that we consider a certain group as an important group in society, the minute they walk into the conference room, they're going to not know. I mean, if you insist on imagining real people doing this, I recommend that you don't even try and imagine real people doing this. But if you insist, then imagine maybe they're hypnotized or something, and the negotiations take place in the dark, and they can't touch themselves, and all kinds of other interesting provisos. But just imagine now, they've walked into the room, and they know that once they figure out the principles of justice, they're going to have to walk right back out again, and they're going to take on their roles in society just like they had them before. But while they're in here trying to figure out the principle of justice, they don't know if they're going to be poor or rich when they walk out. They don't know what group they'll be in. They don't know whether they'll be male or female. They don't know if they'll be black, white, or whatever. They're completely ignorant of what place they will play in society. Those are the conditions, Rawls says, under which we should imagine that, ideally speaking, the contract should be established. People should all know that there are these roles out there. I mean, they don't forget that. They know we have to figure out principles of justice that will tell us how property is to be distributed, how jobs can be got, what the laws will be, whether there are going to be welfare institutions or not, whether we're going to have a free market or not. I mean, we know that there are all these groups out there. We just don't know which one we're going to be a member of. Also imagine, this is another part of the idealization, all of these people are as rational as can be. They're reasonable. What they want out of their life, and what they're trying to do in figuring out the principles of social justice, they're trying to figure out what's going to yield a society that's good for me. But now they don't know who they are. So what are they going to do?
Worst case.
Huh? They're going to leave the room. No, what are they going to do?
I would assume, I was one of them, I'd assume worst case, what if I was or one?
That's exactly right. I mean, each one of them is going to be working on the worst case scenario. Like, I'm going to make sure we come out with principles of justice so that if I turn out to be the least advantaged in society, that I get the best deal out of this. What the veil of ignorance does, basically, I mean, this is just the simple way of putting it. This is just a very graphic way of imagining something that I think we can all be at least somewhat sympathetic with. It's the idea that when you're trying to figure out what's just and what's not just, it's irrelevant whether you're black, white, male, female. Somehow the intuition is, and this is a very liberal intuition, the intuition is none of this should matter. The principles of justice should be absolutely neutral with respect to all of these things that we're going to leave outside the door. We're going to leave outside the conference room. We're going to walk in here. We're trying to figure out what the principles of justice are, but somehow or another, by magic, we're going to leave behind our personal backgrounds. Okay, Dan, what? Puzzle.
I'm just going to do the opposite. Actually disguise what the rules are in society. That way, we call them X, Y, and Z.
Do the opposite. In other words,
So you keep your own rules, but you're not sure what the rules are in society, or who's what.
no, you're the same person either way, right? You're walking, you know, like now I'm visualizing this way, and so maybe
Walking as you are, but then change. Then
do change what?
just, I guess, label whatever you're doing with X, Y, and Z, and if no one knows who's what in that sense.
I mean, I don't, but I remember that I am the tall Polak philosopher, right?
You call tall philosophers Z, but no one knows if it's Z.
Oh, I don't know that I'm Jack Sanders.
Well, you know you're Jack Sanders, but you're not sure that Jack Sanders is Z.
Oh, okay. Well, what do I know and what don't I know then? Z meaning
It's
what?
working.
Z meaning
Yeah, just all you know
that
is-
I'm a professional. I'm an academic.
Yeah, you take all your categories, label them some weird names, foreign whatever, that mean nothing to you, then you go from there. You give them certain characteristics.
All right. What's the advantage of that? I want to get back to. I mean,
That'll work. But
Huh?
never mind.
Okay, what Rawls says is that what we're going to do is we're going to have our full rationality, but we're just going to not know certain details about ourselves that would tend to bias us. And we're going to know, we might know that once we walk back out, we might even remember, boy, I was biased, but I don't remember in what direction. You know, you can remember all that stuff, but you can't remember who you are. And so it's just the way Rawls reasons is every person will have a motive, a personal motive as a representative person, to try and figure out which principles of justice would be best for the least well off. And so that's what motivates this whole scene. It's this whole idea of the veil of ignorance. Now, if you think about this, where now, stripped of, we were chosen as representative persons because we belong to the whatever group it was that we belonged to. Now we've been stripped of that part of our identity. What's left? For Rawls, I think it comes to reason. So another way of putting it, this is just a kind of a graphic way of portraying what reason alone would dictate as the principles of justice, taking into consideration that these principles of justice have to govern a society that is very likely to have the kinds of divisions that ours has. And now, what divisions those are is going to vary from time to time and from place to place. I mean, the divisions in our society won't be the same in the divisions in somebody else's society. So Rawls wants to keep this thing relativized to societies. Within any society, there is a certain array of problems, issues of justice that have to be resolved. It's within that society that you consider what are the relevant groups. And those are the groups that then get representative persons. They're the ones that come to deliberate what is it that's right and wrong, what's just and unjust, as a function of social institutions. So this isn't supposed to be something that's holds forever. What you come out with is going to be relativized to the time and the place, the society that you're in. It's not going to be something that necessarily will come out the same forever and always, for all times and all places. This isn't supposed to be pure reason. This is what reason would dictate under the circumstances of the particular society that we're talking about, as being the principles of justice that should guide relations, liberties, and distributions of goods and benefits in that society. All right, so the veil of ignorance is something that obliterates irrelevant considerations That is, considerations that are irrelevant from the point of view of justice. Irrelevant. And contract, under these circumstances, becomes kind of funny. Now let me see if you see the funniness in this. I mean, contract is supposed to be agreement between more than one person. And we've kind of got more than one person in this room deliberating considerations of justice. They are representative persons representing the many, many groups in society that have to deal with one another. But all the features that make those individuals distinct from one another have been left outside the room. And all that's left is kind of their rationality. Each one of them is going to be similarly motivated. Each one of them is going to try and say, I've got to worry about, the worst situation out there because that might be the one that I walk into. But they're all thinking the same way. That's what's going to make agreement possible. They all have now, all that's left to them is the same general interest in trying to make sure that the society is optimal for the person in the worst situation. So in a way, it's not really different people contracting with one another anymore. It's just sort of the sense in which they were different people is left at the door when we walked in. So in a way, social contract just becomes, as I said a moment ago, that's another way of approaching the same thing, reason. It's what reason dictates should be the terms of social interaction, and the feeling of different people agreeing upon something kind of comes and goes. It's sort of evasive, at least to me. Yeah.
Isn't the conclusion therefore inevitable? Because if you're in this room with a whole bunch of other people and we're creating these laws of justice and we don't know what position we're going to be, you're going to be like, all right, well, let's make everyone equal because then no one misses out and no one wins. Like, and it's they're not, no one, a whole group like this isn't going to come up with a system of justice where some people are preferred over others because no one wants to lose out. So isn't that just given that it's going to be equal?
No, it doesn't. In fact, it doesn't come out that way. It doesn't come out that way that it's necessarily egalitarian. Although there's where everyone gets is going to be exactly equal, because that might not be what's best for the least advantaged group in society. In particular, let me think back. If Hayek's right, that, or if conservative arguments generally, if capitalist arguments generally are right, that say that with capitalism, where you allow some people to get more than others, that those systems wind up bringing everybody up, then, if you can make that case to me, if you can provide me with evidence and show me this theoretically, and then show me that there's empirical evidence that backs this up in the deliberation, I might say, yeah, I like that one better. I mean, I'm going to be better off in that society. And if you bring in Hayek's arguments against, an egalitarian, centrally planned society, and he says, there's no way that you could control a society. Everybody's going to be destitute if we have it like that. We really need the kinds of profit motivations. We need the, differentials. We need to give people motivation to say that, well, you can go out there and you can make more money, because some people will go out and do it, and then what do? They'll produce social benefits by doing that. Now, if you can make that case, then the people in the well, let me give it a name now. This is called the original position. All right, I'll put it right up there, even though there's not much space. The original position. That's the name that Rawls gives. It's very important, just like the veil of ignorance is an important concept too. The original position is the name Rawls gives to that decision situation, where people have gathered together now. The veil of ignorance has left out all the irrelevant considerations. The original position is the situation that remains. That's the place, that's where they deliberate. That's where we bring in these arguments. That's where we say, all right, now what should we do? Should we have a completely egalitarian society? And someone will say, well, that sounds okay to me. But remember, you really care about this. You're making the rules that are going to, guide your life. As far as, with the exception of the stuff that's obscured by the veil of ignorance, again, this is an ideal setting, but in principle, any old information in the world you should have an internet connection to the whole world. You should be able to get any information. You should have all the information in all the libraries, anything that's available. You should have at your disposal. So someone's, working hard. All of us are working hard at this. Someone's going to say, well, maybe the capitalists are right. Maybe we'd be better off not in an egalitarian society, but in one that offers some kind of motivation, some kind of inequalities. Maybe that would bring everybody up, and that will be considered there. Okay. Any questions or comments?
I don't think I quite understand the veil of ignorance. Is it when they come in, they're bang, I have no idea what
Yeah.
I'm
Imagine, if you want a graphic, the conference room doesn't have doors, it's got veils, right? And it's going to be maybe Star Trek technology or something like that from some culture. But you walk through this door, you walk through that veil, and what's left on the other side, on the outside, what's left is your knowledge, your awareness of the particular group that you belong to. Anything that's irrelevant from the point of view of justice is forgotten. And all you know in the room is what's relevant from the point of view of justice. But then you can know everything that's relevant. But what you can't know is the stuff that most of us would regard, I shouldn't say that some people would regard as irrelevant from the point of view of justice. Namely, the particular group you happen to come from. Aaron?
What's stopping the theoretical framework from collapsing after they find out what they are, after they come back into their reality and realize who they are and what they can do?
Well, one of the things that this is supposed to capture is what are the conditions in which we can expect people to cooperate in the social contract? I mean, we can expect people to cooperate under some regime of social rules only if it's in their interest to do so. I mean, that's another, so this is a way of capturing that. It says, well, yeah, people go in there and they work very hard to figure out, all right, they're putting themselves now in the other person's shoes. They're saying, well, maybe I would be the worst off person in society. I've got to make sure that the society works for me too. And so you come to the agreement about the principles of justice. You all shake hands, say, it's been real, and you walk back out the door and say, oh, Christ, I'm the rich multi-billionaire. I'm shafted. I voted for a big tax on rich multi-billionaires. Let's go back in there again. The minute you go back in, you don't know anymore. So, I mean, if that's the setting, and this is what Rawls is saying is not that we should contrive such a room and wait for the technology that accompanies it. Rawls is saying, let's face it, principles of justice are supposed to only consider the things that are relevant from the point of view of justice. You shouldn't be able to contrive principles of justice that are to your advantage but to someone else's disadvantage just because of your power. That's not fair, that's not just. Now, it's probably the rule, the historical rule, but it's not just or fair. Now, his book's called A Theory of Justice. What he wants to emphasize is, well, if it's justice that you're interested in, this is what will get us principles of justice. Will people accept them? Well, if people have a reason to believe that these are the principles that we have, that everybody can buy into, everybody, even the least advantaged, can buy into it, it's going to be a good, stable society, or should be. Now, if you want to know, well, won't people in the real world try to take advantage of others? Yep. But we're interested in principles of justice. What is the ideal that we should be striving toward? And one of the questions will be, how can we control such people? I mean, that's part of the questions about principles of justice, is how will we control people who want to violate the principles of justice? What would be just principles of law enforcement? I mean, that would be part of what we consider in the original position. All right. So, the theoretical framework, we haven't even touched on anything particularly liberal yet, although some people say maybe. Theoretical framework is supposed to be neutral ideologically. It's supposed to allow us in this original position. Some people will say, no. Egalitarianism will really be the best situation. All we have to do is to figure out some way to mimic the market processes. We don't have to go to a capitalist society. We can do something better. Some you might disagree with Hayek. You might bring in evidence that says, look, Hayek's all wrong. But all of this could be brought into the original position. But that's where you do the battle. That's where the battle's done. in the original position, protected by the veil of ignorance, the ideal representative persons work toward a hypothetical agreement about what should be the principles of social justice. The liberal content plainly isn't going to be neutral. The liberal content of Rawls's theory of justice is what Rawls thinks the parties would agree to, at least for societies like ours. In other words, this is a theory of justice that doesn't just have a methodology, a method, but it's got a conclusion. And to cut to the chase, there are two principles of justice that would be arrived at, and I'd better start a new sheet to set those things out. Put it that way. Okay. Okay. We'll start that again. Two principles of justice. These are lexically ordered. What that means is that principle number one is supposed to be satisfied first. You don't go on to principle number two unless principle number one is satisfied. That's the sense in which this is lexically ordered. Principle number one is a principle of equal basic liberty. Each person is supposed to have an equal right to the most extensive total system of equal basic liberty that's compatible with a similar system of liberty for everybody. So Rawls says that equal liberty is vital. Every person has to have the maximal system of basic liberties that's compatible with the similar set for everybody. So that the only thing, what that means is that the only thing that can restrict liberty, according to Rawls, liberty may be restricted only, I'll put an A and B. A, for the sake of strengthening the total system. Like, in other words, if restricting, it's saying that we're going to not allow certain freedoms, the only reason for doing that would be if that strengthens the total system of freedoms for everybody. Now, you have to understand that freedom is a touchy issue. Of liberty. For lots of freedoms, it would seem that increasing my freedom might diminish yours. Like where consider utilization of resources, for example, where I get to use them, you don't. Your freedom to move around unmolested restricts my freedom to molest you, if you want to put it bluntly. So freedoms and systems of rights generally, systems of liberties and rights and freedoms, have to have this funny kind of symbiotic relationship. I mean, so that when he's talking about, this is not uncommon, any system of liberty has got to take into consideration the fact that maximizing one person's liberty or increasing one person's liberty might very well decrease somebody else's liberty. So that's why we say that we're trying to get the maximal system that's compatible for everybody to have. So that might mean that there are lots of restrictions on liberty, but they'd be there. Those restrictions are there because having those restrictions maximizes the total system, what's available to everybody. Now, it may even be that you would adopt in the original position a system in which not everybody's freedom is equal. Okay? But the only way that that would happen is if a lesser liberty is acceptable to those with less. Another way of putting that is, it may very well be that sometimes paternalism is okay. Sometimes society might, well, in the case of children, you can see that. We restrict the liberty of children for their own good. And with children, you don't have to get their okay, I don't think Rawls would say. I mean, with children, they may not know enough to even give their okay. And you have to restrict, especially small children, you have to restrict their liberty, their freedom, just to get them to survive to the point where they can make decisions for themselves, because otherwise they might not. With adults now, it wouldn't normally be okay to restrict their freedom because you think you know better. That wouldn't normally be all right. But Rawls does want to allow for some cases. If it really is in their best interests that their liberty be restricted, if they would accept those if they were rational, then it's okay to restrict their liberties. And that word acceptable covers up some potential problematic stuff. Do they have to actually agree? Do the real people whose liberty is really being acceptable, do they have to actually agree? Nope. Because these decisions are coming up, these decisions are being made in the original position, where these people are idealized. The deciders, the people who are deciding the principles of justice, will be representative persons. And if they, in their super rational wisdom, if they say, now they don't know which group they're going to be in, but if everybody agrees in the original position, boy, people in such and such a category, like children, you might say people who are, psychiatrically damaged. I mean, that's another likely category. In the original position, the psychiatrically damaged, they get a representative person in there too, but of course they're no longer psychiatrically damaged when they're making these decisions. They're saying it is in the best interest of the psychiatrically damaged person that their freedoms be restricted more than the freedoms of other people. So if that's what the person in the original position says, in other words, something like this: if it turns out that I'm one of the persons in group A, psychiatrically damaged or whatever the group is, if it turns out when I walk out of this room that I'm in that group, I would want my liberty restricted. That's the force of this, it should be acceptable. Not in the real world. You don't have to get the agreement of the psychiatrically damaged person, but you have to get the agreement of all of the representative persons in the original position when they're considering that, man, I might be in that group. So that's what this word acceptable comes down to when you're working with this original position. So in other words, the only reason that people, you have to figure out, now why does he think that principle would come up? Well, for both of the principles that are arrived at here, he thinks that if you take very seriously the idea of this original position of the representative persons deliberating without knowledge of where they will be, it's their self-interest that will guide the deliberations. It's them trying to figure out what would be the best system for me, given that I don't know where I'm going to wind up in this society. Now, since I don't know where I'm going to wind up in the society, I better make sure that that the system maximizes the interests of those who are least well off. Okay, any questions about principle number 1? Okay. Now, what have I got down here in my notes? Don't know. Principle number 2. We'll put on a different page, but it has to do with social and economic inequalities, not straightforward political ones. There might be differences of, we're considering now what, if any, differences of status, social status, or differences of economic status that we will allow. Okay, so once again, social and economic inequalities must be A, and this is the crucial place where his whole theory of justice, his liberal conclusions, has a bearing on the stuff that we've been discussing in regard to Marx and Hayek especially. To the benefit, actually he says to the greatest benefit, which is interesting. Of the least advantaged. Okay, so I'll put B down too. The only social and economic inequalities that we will allow in our society are ones that are to the benefit, I'm not going to emphasize the greatest part, just to the benefit of the least advantaged members of the society. So if inequality doesn't benefit the least advantaged, then we won't allow it. And also, all those social and economic inequalities must be attached to offices and social positions open to everybody. And that's a little bit loaded too. This rules out the idea that, for example, great wealth should come to those who are able to create it, regardless of whether they do anything for anybody else. It rules this out unless such a system somehow or another comes back to redound to the benefit of the least advantaged. But if there's no benefit at all to the least advantaged to allow people to get as wealthy as Bill Gates, for example, then we just won't allow that. Now, the argument that goes, well, there is a benefit to the least advantaged. If the system allows people to get as wealthy as Bill Gates, then people will be motivated to get as wealthy as Bill Gates. And the system we've got, it might be argued, by Hayek, for example, a conservative anyway, a pro-capitalist might argue, allowing people to do that gives them the incentive to do what they have to do to make money. And what is it that they have to do to make money? They have to produce products that people will buy. They have to benefit society, in other words. They have to produce things that people want. And they have to produce them, given a competitive environment, they have to produce them in a quality and at a price that's superior, a superior quality and lower price than that of their competitors. Now there's some advertising comes in there. Sometimes you can convince people to buy something of lower quality or higher price because of clever advertising techniques. And so there are other things that go on there. But in the end, since everybody has access to advertising and everybody has access to some of these other factors that are in competition in the marketplace, the argument goes, finally it comes down to this. Who is it that's able to produce things that people want, that people are willing to pay for, that people vote on with their dollars, the most precious, what they get for their own labor? What is it that people are willing to vote for in that way? That's what gets produced. And having this system that allows people to get as wealthy as Bill Gates provides people with the incentives to do all that stuff. And that's to the benefit of everybody. Now that's the argument. That's the pro-capitalist, pro-market argument. Rawls says, well, if that's true, then we can allow it. But that's the factor. That's what has to be shown. That's what we need to know in the original position. Because otherwise, we'd have no reason to allow that. Because while we know, well, I might be Bill Gates, sitting there deliberating in the initial position, in the original position, we also have to consider I might not be. I could be, the worst off person in the whole society. I don't know where I'm going to be. And what I want to be sure about is I want to protect myself from being in that horrible position if it's not necessary. If I be yet worse off just by allowing this possibility that maybe I'll be Bill Gates, reason would dictate, says Rawls, reason would dictate that I wouldn't allow that. If the cost of allowing people to get that rich is that the poor will be yet worse off, or that they're not going to be improved, I won't have any reason to allow it. That's what he calls the difference principle. Okay? And also, the advantages must be attached to offices and positions open to all. Now that's not too clear either. Does that mean that, for example, that everyone has a right to go out there and try to produce income? That might not go far enough for Rawls. Because those that succeed in becoming Bill Gates, or Bill Gates surrogates, and those who don't, may be profiting from their inborn talents, or they may be profiting from the luck of where they got raised. And for Rawls, interestingly, nobody deserves the product of luck. It's the luck of the draw that you have genes that make you ambitious and clever. It's the luck of the draw that you're born into a family and in a circumstance that, for whatever reason, gives you the kind of upbringing that makes you successful. Now, you can never predict what kind of a family and an upbringing this is. Some people might go a long way because they're born into luxury. Other people might actually find that thwarts their ambition. They don't need to go out there and become ambitious producers. So maybe living in luxurious conditions in one's youth, in some cases, in many cases maybe, tends to sort of not be the kind of upbringing that will make you an ambitious producer. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. It'll depend on other things. It may depend on other environmental circumstances. It might depend on, once again, your heredity. Similarly, it might be that being born in very, very difficult circumstances actually is what gives somebody the incentive, the motivation to get out, to go out there and try and pull themselves out of that horrible situation. There's been, there's stories after story after story of that sort of thing too. So it's not easy to predict what kind of an upbringing, it's certainly not easy to predict what kind of heredity is likely to make for success in society. But what Rawls says about this all of it is that nobody deserves the genes that they get. That's not something that is somebody's desert. It's luck. Bad luck, good luck, it's luck. You don't deserve your genes, says Rawls, and you don't deserve the environment that you managed to get into. This isn't something you deserve. So you don't deserve the fruits of those things. In short, you don't deserve the fruits of your labors. These are all part of a great social pool of resources. Just like resources in the land, these are the genetic resources and social resources. And the people in the original position ought to take that into consideration. So, in general, there will be no, we will design a society in which there will be no inequalities unless they benefit the least advantaged. If it were possible to rule out all inequalities, without harming the least advantaged, that would be what we would do in the original position. We would mandate a society in which social and economic positions were all alike. However, Rawls, I think, buys into the idea that this would not be as beneficial to the least advantaged as is a society in which there is at least some openness to inequality of social and economic position. How much inequality? This is what makes Rawls a liberal rather than a conservative, liberal in the modern sense. How much inequality of social and economic conditions will be allowed is a function of just to what extent can it be argued that that the least advantaged are brought up are raised up, are benefited by the inequalities. Rawls suspects that it wouldn't be to the tune of that you have to allow people to get as rich as, he doesn't make this clear in his book, but I suspect that he doesn't imagine that you need to allow people to be able to get as rich as Bill Gates in order to have the social benefit that the market brings. That's excessive. And for Rawls now, Bill Gates, of course, is just capitalizing on his luck in getting good money-making genes and being in a good environment in which he was able to take his natural talents and make use of them in this way. So he's just benefiting from the luck of the draw in terms of his traits. Yes?
Isn't it kind of a waste, though, not to use your talents to the fullest extent? That you can and to
A waste of
succeed?
the social, all right, we're going to think about this in a Rawlsian term. Yes, it would be a waste of the, if you suspect that Bill wouldn't go out there and make all these wonderful products that he produces and annoys people with, but if you suspect that he wouldn't have done that if he didn't know that he would become a multi-billionaire, he never would have done it. If he said, well, we'll let you be a billionaire, but you can't be a multi-billionaire, then if you think then he'd say, nah, I'm going to be a Major League Baseball player instead. I'm going to just watch TV, I'm not going to be productive. If he thought that was true, that he would not use his talents to produce all these good products, then that would be a reason to allow him to become a multi-billionaire. My guess is that Rawls doesn't suspect that you'd need to offer Bill all that much.
Well, what I'm saying is that I don't think there should be a limit onto what one can achieve. Because if you put a limit on that, then it kind of, I don't know. So someone might look at what they're doing and be like, well, I can go so far, but I can't go. There's an end to it, There's no reason to go beyond a certain point.
Well, you would try to, if, again, I'm just trying to, if, this is the big if. If you could make the case in the original position that we would waste some of the social talents that are vested in individuals by their heredity and by their social position, their social situation, if some of those possibilities that are, in fact, good for society, that they would be wasted unless we had such and such a structure, that's a perfectly good argument for the original position. That's the sort of thing that needs to be considered there. But again, we're talking not just about the framework, now we're talking about the liberal conclusion, and I'm indicating to you that I think that wherever you can make that case, this is what Rawls would say, wherever you could actually make that case, then those social inequalities would be allowed. But, do you really think that the only, I mean, that the only incentive to people like Gates is money? Or might there be some other advantage that, maybe he just, likes producing those products, and you'd give him a strong financial incentive, but you don't need to give him all that much of a financial incentive. It's hard to figure out how the line would be drawn or what you would say. I mean, if you said, I think what you're worried about is that, you told, Bill may not have any idea that he's going to make even $1 billion. He goes out there because he wants to make money. He thinks he can make a lot of money without dreaming how much money he's going to make. But then, he does make a lot of money, and he moves up to the $1 billion mark. And if the limit was placed there that people can't earn more than $1 billion, then he might just stop and go home. I made my billion. I won. But if you don't put any ceiling to it, then that may motivate people once they get to these things that you might consider those, motivate them to go on. I don't know what the answer would be, the particular answer to that challenge. But for Rawls, if indeed allowing people to make indefinitely large amounts of money, if you can demonstrate that what that does, that has the effect of improving the lot, of those who are least well off in society, then you've made it. You've made the case. I mean, that's the way to defend such institutions. If you can't make that, if someone else in the original position can say, well, I can see how that works, but here's another arrangement that would get around that problem, then if you could avoid the inequality and get the same benefit, you would choose the thing that avoided the inequality. Because without the benefit, the inequality is unjust. Because people don't deserve, and this is the very peculiar and some occasionally compelling contention of Rawls's, but people don't deserve their natural talents. They didn't do anything to deserve those natural talents. They just got them. And people don't deserve the social circumstance that makes it possible for them to profit from the natural talents. They don't deserve any of that stuff. Some people are lucky, some people aren't. So people they don't deserve the benefits. The way to portion out benefits is not, in other words, when we're in the original position, the way to apportion out the benefits of society is not according to individual desert, because there isn't any individual desert. What we have to consider instead is which way of designing institutions is most beneficial to the person who is least well off. And the reason why we will do it that way, why that will be our principle, is because when we take, according to Rawls now, when we take this original position, when we neglect things that are irrelevant from a moral point of view, then all that's left is, well, especially if you imagine these folks deliberating about principles that they themselves will have to live by, and they don't know in what position, they will be inclined to use their own best interest. They will say, all right, we will apportion out unequally only if that tends to be to the advantage of the least well off. Because I might be that least well off person, and nobody deserves being better off. So, in a nutshell, the way that this works between Hayek and Rawls, Hayek makes the case against Marx, as you remember. Hayek made the case, this maybe nothing wrong with your goals, Marx. I'm not criticizing your goals, your socialist goals. I'm just arguing that you can't get there or anywhere else using centrally planned economic principles. You can't, central planning won't work. That argument would be made, according to Rawls, in the original position. And if that's correct, now this is an empirical matter. This isn't just a matter of some theory. Either centrally planned economies can or they can't work. Now, whether we've experimented sufficiently to know that or not is a matter of some debate. And it may be that some examples of what look like centrally planned economies work better than others. And maybe there are some ways of correcting. I mean, some people who are still advocates of centrally planned economies won't necessarily just go off and die because Hayek has said that they can't work. They might say, well, maybe we can correct them in some ways so as to mimic some of these features in the market that work to bring reason and rationale or bring reasonable direction to the economy. Maybe we could mimic somehow doing that in a centrally planned economy. Hayek's suspicious. He doesn't think you could, but maybe we really could. All of these considerations would be taken up in the original position. But for Rawls, that will be what decides the issue. Can we or can we not achieve goals that are fair, socially fair, without economic inequality in particular? Hayek says, no, you need it, or the conservatives anyway, the pro-capitalist, pro-market forces would say, no, you need to have those opportunities for advancement in order to spur activity in the market. Marx would say, no, you don't have to have that. Rawls argues that's the key issue here, not personal desert. Key issue is which system of institutions actually benefits the least advantage.